I didn't hurt anyone. You can check the report again. There's no assault charge. The report shows no property damage and no threats. And I wasn't drunk or high. I just wouldn't open the door. And you locked me in here for that. You asked me to start at the beginning, so I will. It all started with someone knocking at 1:13 in the morning. 3 slow knocks. I live alone on the 3rd floor. My apartment is at the end of the corridor. No one knocks that late unless something is wrong. I checked the time again to make sure I wasn't half asleep. 1:13 a.m. I stayed still and listened. I didn't hear any doors open, and the hallway outside my place stayed quiet. Then I heard them again. Same 3 knocks. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The corridor light was on. I could see the lift at the far end and the turn toward the stairs. No one was standing outside my door. I waited there for a while, expecting someone to step into view. No one did. I went back to bed. The second night, it happened again. I didn't need to check the clock this time. I knew what time it was. I heard the 3 knocks and stayed where I was until they stopped. Then I heard movement outside the door, like someone standing there, shifting their weight. It sounded like bare feet on carpet. I went to the door and checked again. The corridor was clear. I opened the hallway camera feed on my phone. The screen showed my door, the lift, and the corner by the stairs. Everything looked exactly the way it always does at night. Then the knocking came back. On the camera feed, nothing moved near the door, but under my hand, I felt the wood vibrate. That was the first night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, trying to make sense of what was happening. By morning, I knew I needed proof. On the 3rd night, I set my phone up on the kitchen counter before it began. I angled it toward the door. I wanted it recorded. When the clock turned 1:13, the knocking came. You can hear it clearly on the recording. 3 knocks against the wood. I stepped into frame and stood in front of the door. I didn't speak. I didn't move. The knocking stopped. The next morning, my neighbor stopped me in the hallway. She asked if everything was all right. I told her it was. She said she'd heard someone knocking on my door the past 2 nights. She said she looked through her peephole. She saw me standing outside my own apartment, knocking, then stopping, then knocking again. I told her I hadn't left my apartment last night. She suggested I might have been sleepwalking. I don't sleepwalk. That night, I stayed in the living room with the hallway feed open in my hand. When the knocking started, I watched the screen. The corridor was empty. Then, my neighbor's door opened. She stepped into the hallway and walked toward my door. She stopped in front of it and looked directly at the camera mounted above my frame. She said calmly, "You have to let him in." She turned and went back inside her own apartment. I didn't open the door. The next morning, I asked her about it. She told me she hadn't left her apartment that night. She said she'd slept straight through. That's when I called the police. 2 officers came that afternoon. They walked through the apartment, checked the locks, checked the windows. Everything was secure. They reviewed the building footage. At 1:13, the corridor was empty. At 1:14, it showed me stepping out of my apartment, barefoot, knocking on my own door, 3 times. At 1:15, it showed me leaning closer to the door, like I was listening, then knocking again. They played the recording twice. I was standing in my living room with them while they watched it. The deadbolt was locked. The door hadn't opened. Next, they checked the timestamps. They matched. One officer asked if I had access to the camera system. The other asked if I had edited the footage. I hadn't. I wouldn't know how. They said the footage didn't lie. They told me I must have been doing it myself and not remembering because of stress, because I hadn't slept. I tried to accept that explanation. I needed it to be true, but the knocking didn't stop. It just wasn't at the door anymore. One night it came from the bedroom wall. Another night it came from the kitchen cabinet. 3 knocks each time. Always at 1:13. I stopped going to work and I stopped answering calls. I stayed inside with the lights on. On the 7th night, I unlocked the deadbolt before it started. I wanted to prove something. But this time, the knocking didn't come from the door. At 1:13, I heard knocking inside the bedroom, coming from the wardrobe. I turned toward it and listened. The first knock hit the wardrobe hard, and the doors shifted in the frame. It sounded like someone striking the wood from the inside. The second knock came just as strong. On the third, the handle dropped down and stayed there, like someone was holding it from the other side. The doors started to open on their own. Slowly. The line between them split and widened while I stood there watching. There was only darkness where my things should have been. The doors kept opening. I didn't wait for them to open all the way. I ran. One of the neighbors saw me standing on the stairwell landing. They said I was facing the wall and not moving. I didn't respond when they spoke to me. That's when they called the police. They found me there. They said I was knocking on the wall. 3 times. They said I wouldn't stop. They say I was cooperative. No visible injuries. No signs of intoxication. I kept repeating the same sentence. It isn't outside. Now, I'm here. The doors lock at 10 every night, and observation checks happen every hour. There are cameras in the corridor and security throughout the building. I understand why you think this is safer. You are sitting with me tonight to see it for yourself. It's 1:13. I hear it again. 3 knocks from the other side of this door. I'm looking at you now. You keep writing, but don't look up. I guess you can't hear it. That's fine. Just write this part down too, because when it stops knocking on my door, it starts knocking on whoever's listening.